In this video, we're going to go over 10 things you need to do or think about before you file for divorce. So now you've decided it's time for divorce. You've contemplated, you couldn't decide before, but now you finally decided it's time. The divorce is real and you're ready to file. You're ready to begin the process. Before you take that step, here's some things you need to think about and things you need to get in order, okay? The reason being is it's gonna make things easier down the road. There's a lot at stake here in divorce, a lot of times, okay? If there's some things that you want to make sure that you have, such as your passport or your birth certificate, or even sentimental things from your childhood, you need to start looking at those things now. You want to make sure they can't be destroyed or hidden. You need to start, if you don't have access to some things, it's maybe harder after you leave to get access. It may make your divorce harder if you don't do the necessary prep work on the front end, right? So first thing is gather relevant documents. Begin getting into, get a copy of the mortgage, get a copy of the deed, get a picture of the safe and what's inside the safe. Get passwords for bank account statements. Find out what retirement accounts he or she has. Find out what retirement accounts you have. These are questions that are going to come up, and you want to be able to have at least an idea before we get to the discovery phase. Okay? Start looking for those car titles. Having this information now will save you a lot of time down the road. Number 2, open your own bank account. Okay? A lot of times opening your own bank account and moving your paycheck to that will automatically trigger the divorce. Your spouse will get worried, but it doesn't mean you have to necessarily move all that money yet. Okay? Go ahead and have that bank account ready for when you're ready to make the move, that you've got it, that you can just flip a switch and it's done. So that way, when you see he's ready to go or she's ready to go, you just transfer the money you need immediately. Don't have to take the time to go and create an account. Next, start thinking about your future, okay? If you're on your spouse's healthcare plan, start looking on Obamacare and figure out what healthcare you qualify for, how much it's gonna cost. Start looking at what your budget's gonna be. If you're gonna be living in an apartment, what's your monthly costs gonna be? Start thinking about where your children would go to school, right? If it's gonna be a different school. Start thinking about whether you're gonna keep the same job, get a new job. Those are thoughts, and you gotta start organizing now, okay? Number 4 is don't sign anything. A lot of times people will try to get quick and go, hey, I'm done, and then will sign whatever their spouse puts in front of them. That's a mistake, okay? You might be done and you might be ready to get out, but you've got to get out on the correct terms, okay? If you sign something that puts you in a bad spot, something you can't do, it's gonna financially ruin you. Or time with your children, it could ruin you, okay? You need to make sure that you review any documents with a lawyer, okay? Next, change your passwords. Make sure your Facebook account's passwords change. Your Google passwords change. Make sure your TikTok or your Snapchat, any of those things that your spouse may have had access to in the past, make sure those passwords are changed, because you see it all the time. Your iCloud, specifically your iCloud, that's the one where I see a lot of issues where the other spouse will get into their iCloud and start checking out text messages on their iPad, and reading your text messages on your phone. So get those passwords changed, okay? Set up a P.O. box is an idea. That way you can receive your mail while you're still living in the house with your spouse. So if your attorney needs to send you something to sign, if your attorney needs to send you a letter. I know that in this day and age that people are using email a lot more, but we're still using mail too, okay? And so it just gives you a little bit more privacy and gives you a sort of a place to call your own, right? Next is talk to a lawyer, okay? Even if it's not time to file, you need to talk to a lawyer so that you have an idea of when you need to file. And a lot of times, more than anything, is I need to be able, or any lawyer, whoever it is, needs to be able to prepare you for when you're having those negotiations and speaking about how we're going to divvy up assets, how we're going to divvy up custody, how we're going to do child support, that you're more informed, right? Anytime you're more informed and have more information than the other side in a negotiation, you have the upper hand. And so talking to a lawyer before you begin negotiating with your spouse gives you the upper hand. You know more than they do. You're more likely to know what a judge will or won't do when you're talking to them. So for instance, yesterday I had a client come in and they told me what all they wanted. Specifically, they said they wanted the house, okay? And I had to give them bad news and say, hey, look, this is a 2-year marriage. Your spouse had the house before the marriage. That judge is likely not to give you any equity at all, or if any, very little, okay? Well, at that point, they had a leg up on their spouse in negotiating so that they knew even a small amount of equity from the house is more than likely more than what a court would give them, right? And so that piece of information gives them a leg up when negotiating with their spouse. Next, deciding where you want to live. If you're deciding that you want to go live with your mother, which is 60 miles down the road, that's going to be different when we're discussing your divorce than if you're wanting to stay in the same school district. So deciding where to live is also a huge part of a divorce, okay? Especially when we're dealing with kids, okay? Because if we're living in the same school district, week on, week off is a possibility. If we're living 60 miles away, it's no longer a possibility, right? And then at that point, there's risk involved. And we're going back to talking to a lawyer. The risk is somebody's going to be an every other weekend parent, okay? You just want to make sure that's not you, okay? Judges generally are not going to want you to move kids out of town, okay? And we'll talk about that in another one, but I'm just sort of giving you things to think about. Next, think about temporary orders. Temporary orders such as, are you going to need alimony immediately? Maybe a housewife and you have no income. Are you going to need an order to make sure that the husband isn't moving money around? Are you going to need an order to get child support immediately? Are you going to need an order to keep him from coming to the marital home because he's dangerous? Things like that. How do we get between now and the final divorce? What orders are we going to need from the court? Start thinking about that now, okay? Next, communicate with your spouse, okay? Anytime you can work with your spouse to get your divorce done uncontested, or at least agree on as many things as you can, the easier and less stress, and the more stress-free, not less stress-free, more stress-free, and cheaper your divorce is going to be. So that is important. And another thing is, when you're communicating about the divorce, you can at least let your lawyer know. It gives me secrets to know exactly what the other party's goals are so that we know where to poke and know where they're willing to move in a negotiation. So these are 10 things that you need to do to prepare before you're filing for a divorce. If you've got any questions,